When the Galactic Council exiled humanity for saving innocent lives, they thought they were teaching us a lesson. Instead, they gave us the motivation to build something better than their 10-million-year empire, and we did it in just 50 years. The pristine halls of the Galactic Council station gleamed with the cold perfection of 1,000 civilizations working in harmony, or so they claimed. Ambassador Sarah Chen stood at the defendant's podium, her hands steady despite the weight of humanity's future resting on her shoulders. The council chamber stretched before her like a vast amphitheater, filled with beings that had once called humanity promising. Crystalline Zerathi sparkled in the upper tiers, their silicon-based forms refracting the chamber's artificial light into rainbow patterns. The aquatic depths dwelt in their sealed water tanks, tentacles swaying with what humans had learned to recognize as contempt. Most prominent of all were the hegemony, tall, pale humanoids who had guided galactic civilization for millennia and clearly intended to continue doing so. Humanity, intoned High Chancellor Vexhai, his voice carrying the authority of 10,000 years of civilization, stands accused of violating the Sentient Rights Accords, the Non-Interference Doctrine, and most gravely, the Temporal Stability Treaty. Sarah's jaw tightened. She had expected this moment for months, ever since humanity's first major independent action had shaken the carefully ordered galaxy. With respect, Chancellor, humanity rejects these charges. We saved the Kythera system from total annihilation. We prevented a genocide. A ripple of what might have been laughter passed through the Zerathi section. One of their speakers, a being whose crystalline form pulsed with amber light, stepped forward. Saved? You disrupted a natural evolutionary process that had been observed and catalogued for 3 centuries. Your interference has created temporal paradoxes that our scientists are still trying to unravel. Natural? Sarah's voice rose, her diplomatic training warring with her very human sense of justice. The Veltar weren't evolving. They were being systematically exterminated by solar flares that could have been prevented with technology the Council has possessed for millennia. We watched you watch them die for 300 years and do nothing. From the aquatic section, a Depths delegate's translated voice bubbled through the chamber's speakers. The young species misunderstands. Intervention disrupts the cosmic balance. Some species are meant to transcend through death, others through survival. The Kythera system taught valuable lessons about stellar engineering and species adaptation. Now those lessons are lost. Sarah stared at the water tank, her reflection distorted by the curved transparent steel. Lessons? There were 4 billion sentient beings on those worlds. They had art, music, mathematics, dreams. They weren't your laboratory specimens. High Chancellor Vexhai's expression remained impassive. Humanity's emotional responses, while understandable given your youth as a species, cannot be allowed to dictate galactic policy. Your actions in the Kythera system violated protocols established over millions of years. You acted unilaterally, without council approval, using technologies you barely understand. We understood them well enough to save lives, Sarah shot back. While you debated and observed and took notes, we built solar collectors, established orbital platforms, and evacuated 12 million Veltar to safe worlds. We did what was right. What was right? The voice came from the highest tier where the eternal minds dwelt, ancient beings who had uploaded their consciousness to quantum matrices eons ago. Right is a primitive concept, flesh speaker. Order is eternal. Chaos is temporary. You have chosen chaos. The weight of their disapproval pressed down on Sarah like a physical force. She had known this day would come. Humanity had always been different, too emotional, too impulsive, too willing to act when others would observe. But she had hoped, naively perhaps, that their results would speak louder than their methods. Then let me be clear, Sarah said, her voice carrying across the vast chamber. Humanity stands by its actions. If saving innocent lives is chaos, then we choose chaos. If preventing genocide is primitive, then we embrace our primitive nature. High Chancellor Vexhai leaned forward, his ancient eyes reflecting depths of experience humanity could barely comprehend. Then humanity chooses exile. By the ancient laws that govern this council, by the votes of the member species, by the wisdom of the eternal minds, humanity is hereby expelled from the Galactic Council. All trade agreements are dissolved. All technology sharing is terminated. All diplomatic protections are revoked. The chamber fell silent. Sarah felt the moment crystallize around her, the turning point that would define her species' future. She had come here hoping to defend humanity's actions. Instead, She had witnessed their complete rejection by galactic civilization. Furthermore, the Chancellor continued, humanity is hereby confined to your home system. Any human vessels detected beyond the Sol system's heliopause will be considered hostile and dealt with accordingly. You have 1 galactic standard year to recall all human personnel from Council space. Sarah straightened her shoulders. And if we refuse? Then you will learn why the Council has maintained peace for 10 million years, the Chancellor replied. Through strength, when wisdom fails, the emergency session of the United Earth Government convened in Geneva exactly 72 hours after Ambassador Chen's transmission reached Earth. President Martinez stood before the assembled representatives of humanity, her face grim but determined. They want us to crawl back into our corner and behave, she said, her words carrying the weight of righteous anger. They want us to pretend that watching genocide is somehow noble, that standing by while innocents die is the mark of an advanced civilization. The chamber erupted in voices, some calling for compliance, others for defiance, many simply expressing shock at the sudden reversal of humanity's fortunes. Secretary of Defense Admiral Harrison raised his hand for quiet. The military implications are severe, he said. The Council fleet outguns us by a factor of roughly 10,000 to 1. Their technology is millennia ahead of ours. If we choose to resist, we're not talking about resistance, interrupted Dr. Elena Vasquez, head of the Human Expansion Project. We're talking about survival. They've given us 1 year to recall every human in Council space. That's over 2 million people scattered across 40 systems. Even if we could bring them all home, what then? Do we sit in Sol system forever, our growth permanently stunted? President Martinez nodded slowly. Dr. Vasquez is correct. This isn't just about punishment. It's about ensuring humanity never becomes a threat to their established order. They're not just exiling us. They're trying to trap us. Admiral Chen Wei, no relation to the ambassador but equally fierce in his convictions, stood from the military section. Madam President, I've been running scenarios since the ambassador's report arrived. The Council expects us to meekly accept exile because they believe we have no choice. But they're making the same mistake every empire in history has made. They're underestimating the people they've pushed into a corner. Explain, Martinez said. They're giving us a year, Chen said. A year to recall our people, yes, but also a year to prepare. They think we'll spend it begging for readmission to their little club. Instead, we should spend it doing what humanity does best, adapting and overcoming. Dr. Vasquez leaned forward. You're suggesting we comply with the recall but use it as cover for something else. I'm suggesting, Admiral Chen said, that we take our people home but we don't go home to stay. The galaxy is vast, and the Council controls maybe 30% of it. There are entire spiral arms they consider uninhabitable because they don't meet their environmental preferences. There are systems they've marked as unsuitable for development because they lack certain resources or have unstable stars. President Martinez felt something kindle in her chest, the same fire that had driven humans to cross oceans, climb mountains, and reach for the stars. You're talking about building something new. I'm talking about building something better, Chen replied. The Council thinks in terms of stability and control. We think in terms of growth and adaptation. Let them have their perfect static civilization. We'll build something dynamic. Dr. Vasquez pulled up a holographic display of the galaxy. Red zones marked Council space, a sprawling network of systems connected by established trade routes and hyperspace lanes. But vast regions remained unmarked, unexplored, unclaimed. The Perseus Arm, she said, highlighting a spiral of stars. The Council considers it a backwater because most of the systems lack the heavy elements they prefer for their technology. But our tech is different. We've learned to work with what we have, not demand perfect conditions. The Outer Rim territories, Admiral Chen added, gesturing to another section. Dismissed by the Council as frontier wilderness, because the star density is lower and travel between systems takes longer. But that just means more room to grow. President Martinez studied the display. In the red zones, billions of beings lived ordered, regulated lives under Council guidance. In the unmarked regions, there was only potential, raw, unlimited potential. How long would it take? She asked. To establish a foothold? 5 years, Dr. Vasquez replied. To build something that could rival the Council? 50 years, maybe less if we're smart about it. And if they try to stop us? Admiral Chen's smile was predatory. Let them try. They'll be fighting us on our terms, in systems we've chosen with technology we've optimized for conditions they consider uninhabitable. They've just handed us the greatest strategic advantage in military history. They're underestimating us. The chamber fell quiet as the implications sank in. They were discussing not just exile, but transformation, not just survival, but revolution. President Martinez looked around the room at the representatives of humanity, engineers and explorers, soldiers and scientists, dreamers and pragmatists. These people had already surprised the galaxy once by refusing to stand by while innocents died. Now they had the chance to surprise it again. "Draft the orders," she said. "All human personnel in council space are to return home immediately." But they're not coming back empty-handed. Every ship, every piece of technology, every bit of intelligence that can help us build our own path forward. If the council wants to exile us for doing what's right, then we'll show them exactly what exiled humanity can accomplish. 3 years after the exile, the mining ship Determination dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the Kepler 442 system. Captain Rosa Santos stood on the bridge, watching the star's golden light wash over her crew. This was their 19th scouting mission into the Perseus Arm, and by far their most promising discovery. "Stellar composition analysis confirms heavy element abundance," reported Lieutenant Commander Kim Park, her science officer. 3 rocky worlds in the habitable zone, asteroid belt rich in rare metals, gas giants positioned perfectly for fuel harvesting. "Any signs of intelligent life?" Santos asked. "Negative on intelligence, but the second planet shows clear biosignatures. Carbon-based ecosystem. Complex but pre-technological." Santos nodded. Standard Council doctrine would have classified this system as protected wilderness, and forbidden any development that might interfere with natural evolution. Humanity had learned to take a different approach. Mr. Torres signaled the colony fleet. "We've found New Geneva." The response came 12 hours later. Not just the colony fleet, but an entire mobile city. The Frontier's Edge was humanity's first arc ship, built from salvaged council technology and human ingenuity. 15 kilometers long and home to nearly 1 million people, it represented everything humanity had learned about surviving in an hostile galaxy. Admiral Chen Wei's face appeared on the bridge's main screen, transmitted from the arc ship's command center. "Captain Santos, your report makes interesting reading. A garden world, industrial resources, and no political complications. It's almost too good to be true." "That's what worries me, Admiral," Santos replied. "The Council had to know about this system. It's along one of their old survey routes. Why didn't they claim it?" "Because they think like the Council," came a new voice. Dr. Elena Vasquez stepped into view beside Admiral Chen. "They see a world with active volcanism, unstable weather patterns, and aggressive native life forms. They see problems. We see opportunities." Santos pulled up the planet's geological survey. Dr. Vasquez was right. Kepler 442b was far from the stable, predictable worlds the Council preferred. Massive storm systems dominated its weather patterns. Volcanic activity continually reshaped its continents. The dominant species were large, aggressive, and territorial. "The storm systems are actually beneficial," Dr. Vasquez continued. "They distribute heat and moisture across the continents far more efficiently than stable weather patterns. The volcanic activity means rich soil and geothermal energy, and the native life forms? They're excellent sources of genetic material for our bioengineering projects." This was the new humanity. Not conquerors who destroyed what they found, but adapters who worked with existing systems. They had learned hard lessons from the Council's rejection, and chief among them was this: if you're going to be called primitive, at least be effectively primitive. "Colony deployment will begin immediately," Admiral Chen announced. "Captain Santos, your ship will coordinate the industrial surveys. We need to know where to place the mining operations, manufacturing centers, and shipyards." "Shipyards?" Santos raised an eyebrow. "New Geneva isn't just going to be another colony, Captain. It's going to be the first capital of the Human Federation. And capitals need navies." Over the following months, humanity transformed Kepler 442b with a speed that would have horrified the Council. Rather than fighting the planet's natural systems, they worked with them. Storm-powered generators harvested electrical energy from the constant weather patterns. Volcanic forges used the planet's internal heat to smelt metals. Genetic engineers studied the aggressive native life and developed enhanced crops that could thrive in the harsh conditions. Most importantly, they built ships. Not the elegant crystalline vessels preferred by council races, but tough, adaptable craft designed for the harsh realities of unexplored space. Each ship was different, optimized for specific roles and conditions, built by crews who understood that perfection was less important than effectiveness. The first completed vessel was the Defiant, a heavy cruiser that looked more like an industrial platform than a warship. Its hull was scarred and patched, its weapons were mismatched systems salvaged from a dozen different sources, and its crew quarters were cramped and utilitarian. It was also the most advanced warship humanity had ever built. Captain Maria Santos, no relation to Rosa, stood on its bridge as it departed New Geneva's orbital shipyards. Her mission was simple: explore the next system, establish contact with any inhabitants, and determine its suitability for human expansion. But as she watched New Geneva fall away behind them, she knew her real mission was something larger. The Council had tried to contain humanity by cutting them off from galactic civilization. Instead, they had freed humanity to create something entirely new. The Defiant jumped to hyperspace, carrying with it humanity's message to the galaxy. We are not bound by your rules. We will not accept your limitations. And we are just getting started. The Defiant discovered the Kethvar by accident, or perhaps by the kind of luck that seemed to follow humanity wherever they went. Captain Maria Santos had been investigating unusual energy readings in the Tau Ceti sector when her ship's sensors detected the wreckage of an alien fleet drifting in the void. Composition. Analysis shows tritanium-enhanced hull plating, reported Commander Jackson Liu, the ship's tactical officer. That's Council military technology, but the design patterns are all wrong. These ships weren't built by any Council member species. Santos studied the tactical display. Dozens of vessels hung motionless in space, their hulls scarred by weapon impacts. At the center of the formation, one massive ship remained partially intact. Life signs? She asked, faint but present. Whatever happened here, some of them survived. Santos made the decision that would reshape humanity's relationship with the galaxy. Prepare an away team. Full first contact protocols, but be ready for anything. If there are survivors in that wreck, they've been floating here for weeks. They're going to be desperate. The boarding party found them in the flagship's emergency compartments, 47 survivors of a species humanity had never encountered. The Kethvar were tall, slender beings with chitinous exoskeletons and multifaceted eyes that reflected intelligence and pain in equal measure. Their leader, a scarred veteran named Thakhan, spoke in broken Council standard. You are not Council. Your ship, your faces, unknown. Dr. Sarah Kim, the Defiant's chief medical officer, was already working on the most seriously wounded survivors. We're human, she said without looking up from her patient. And you're not dying on my watch. Thakhan's mandibles clicked in what the translation software eventually recognized as bitter laughter. Human. Yes, I know this word. The Council speaks of humans with disdain, the young race that defies wisdom. Santos knelt beside the alien leader. What happened here? Who did this to you? We are Kethvar, Thakhan replied. We're Kethvar. Now we are nothing. The Council came with their laws, their treaties, their promises of protection. They said we must accept their oversight, join their system, become part of their order. We refused. The story unfolded over the following days as the Defiant's crew worked to save what remained of the Kethvar fleet. The Kethvar had been an independent species, technologically advanced but politically naive. When the Council's expansion reached their territory, they had been offered the same choice given to all species: join or be isolated. Unlike humanity, the Kethvar had chosen to fight. Their fleet had been formidable by galactic standards, fast, well-armed ships crewed by warriors who had known no defeat. But they had made the same mistake humanity almost made. They had fought the Council on the Council's terms. We met them in open battle, Thakhan explained to Santos. Honor demanded it. Our ancestors demanded it. We flew to meet their fleet in the void between stars, confident in our righteousness and our strength. And they destroyed you, Santos said. Destroyed us? No, they demonstrated us. They used weapons that passed through our shields as if they did not exist. They disabled our engines without damaging our hulls. They captured our ships and crews intact, then broadcast our defeat across the sector as a lesson to others. Santos felt her jaw clench. What happened to your people? Those who survived the demonstration were given a choice: accept council oversight and return to our worlds as a protectorate species, or face exile from our home system. Most chose submission. My fleet chose exile, and then they hunted you down anyway. Takhan's multifaceted eyes focused on Santos with laser intensity. The council does not hunt. They are too civilized for such crudeness. They simply stopped maintaining the hyperspace beacons in regions where we might seek refuge. They diverted trade routes away from systems that might offer us aid. They classified our technology as potentially dangerous and forbade any species from providing us with spare parts or fuel. Santos understood. The council hadn't destroyed the Kethvar fleet. They had systematically isolated it until it died of neglect. It was elegant, deniable, and utterly ruthless. How long have you been drifting? 6 months. Our last fuel depot was interdicted. Our last ally was convinced to sever contact. We were heading for the Rim territories when our engines finally failed. Takhan's voice carried the weight of absolute defeat. We were preparing for the final honor when your ship arrived. Dr. Kim looked up from her patient.
Final honor?
Ritual suicide, Santos said quietly. Rather than die slowly, they would have destroyed their own ships. Now you understand, Takhan said. The council does not conquer. It does not destroy. It simply makes all other choices impossible until submission becomes survival. Santos stood and walked to the wreck's observation port. Beyond the transperistyle, stars wheeled in patterns that had been mapped by council surveys, cataloged by council scientists, and governed by council laws for millions of years. Humanity had been lucky. Their exile had been exile to freedom, not exile to death. Commander Liu, she said into her comm unit. Signal the fleet. We need the determination out here with heavy salvage equipment. And get me a priority channel to Admiral Chen. Captain. Takhan struggled to his feet. What are you planning? Santos turned back to the alien leader. The council made you outcasts because you wouldn't submit to their rules. They made us outcasts because we wouldn't submit to their conscience. Maybe it's time the outcasts started looking out for each other. 3 days later, the combined human Kethvar fleet arrived at New Geneva. The Kethvar survivors stood on the observation deck of the frontier's edge, watching in amazement as humanity's first interstellar city spread out below them. Impossible, whispered Takhan. 3 years. You have accomplished in 3 years what most species require centuries to achieve. Admiral Chen Wei stood beside him, hands clasped behind his back in a pose that had become familiar to the galaxy's outcasts and rebels. We had motivation, he said simply. The council told us we were too primitive to govern ourselves, too emotional to make rational decisions, too young to understand the complexities of galactic civilization. They gave us something to prove. And now we prove it. Not just for ourselves, but for everyone the council has written off as unsuitable for their perfect order. Chen turned to face the Kethvar leader. Your people have skills humanity needs: advanced metallurgy, quantum engineering, strategic thinking tested in real combat. We have something your people need: a place to rebuild, resources to draw on, and allies who understand what it's like to be judged and found wanting by those who think they know better. Takhan's mandibles clicked thoughtfully. An alliance? A beginning, Chen corrected. The Kethvar are the first, but they won't be the last. The galaxy is full of species the council considers problematic, too aggressive, too independent, too different from their ideal. We're going to find them, help them, and give them what the council never would: a real choice. Below them, New Geneva's shipyards were already being modified to accommodate Kethvar technology. Human engineers worked alongside alien technicians, creating hybrid designs that combined the best of both civilizations. It was messy, chaotic, and utterly unlike the ordered perfection of council space. It was also the beginning of something that would shake the galaxy to its foundations: the first truly free alliance of species, bound not by law or tradition, but by the simple recognition that different didn't mean wrong. The Human Federation had gained its first allies. The Council had created its first real rivals. 5 years after the Kethvar Accord, the Human Federation had become something unprecedented in galactic history: a genuine alliance of equals. Admiral Chen Wei stood in the command center of Freehold Station, humanity's mobile capital, watching representatives from 17 species conduct the business of building a new kind of civilization. The Kethvar had been just the beginning. Word of humanity's success had spread through the galaxy's underground networks. The traders who operated in gray markets, the explorers who pushed beyond mapped space, the species too proud or too different to accept council oversight. They came in ones and twos at first, then in fleets. The Zephyrians arrived as refugees from a failed council integration program that had tried to force their nomadic fleets to settle on designated worlds. Their ships were living things, grown rather than built, capable of surviving in the vacuum of space without external life support. Council biotechnology couldn't replicate their methods, so the Council had decided their methods were unsafe and tried to ground them permanently. The Cortani came seeking revenge. Their homeworld had been strip-mined by Council corporations under the Resource Development for the Greater Good initiative. The Council had offered the survivors resettlement packages and counseling for their attachment to unsuitable environments. The Cortani had preferred to take their mining expertise to people who understood that a world was more than just raw materials waiting to be extracted. The Ethereals were perhaps the strangest addition to the growing Confederation. Energy beings who existed as coherent plasma fields, they had been dismissed by the Council as non-standard life forms, with limited practical applications. Humanity had discovered that the Ethereals were master engineers, capable of manipulating matter at the atomic level. They simply worked with different tools and thought on different timescales. Each species brought not just numbers but perspective. The Zephyrian bioships gave the Confederation unprecedented mobility. Cortani mining techniques could extract resources from dead worlds the Council considered worthless. Ethereal matter manipulation allowed for construction projects that defied conventional physics. But it was more than just practical advantages. Each species also brought cultural insights that reshaped how humanity thought about civilization itself. The Council's greatest weakness, explained Ambassador Takhan during one of the Confederation's planning sessions, is their belief that there is one optimal way to organize society. They see diversity as inefficiency. Dr. Elena Vasquez, now the Confederation's chief xenocultural advisor, nodded agreement. They've spent millions of years perfecting a system that works for them. They can't understand why anyone would want something different. Captain Santos, now Admiral Santos of the Confederation fleet, pulled up a holographic map of known space. That gives us an advantage they can't counter. They think in terms of controlling territory, dominating trade routes, enforcing compliance. We think in terms of networks. The map showed the Council's domain as a solid block of red, encompassing roughly 30% of the galaxy's habitable systems. The Confederation appeared as scattered dots of blue, seemingly insignificant by comparison. But the lines connecting those dots told a different story. Unlike the Council's rigid hierarchy of communication, the Confederation operated as a web. Each member species maintained its own internal networks while contributing to the larger whole. Information flowed freely in all directions. Resources moved to where they were needed most, not where regulations dictated they should go. Most importantly, innovation happened everywhere, not just at approved research centers. We're not trying to replace the Council, Santos continued. We're showing the galaxy that there's an alternative to the Council. Every species that joins us proves that their way isn't the only way. The proof was becoming increasingly difficult to ignore. Confederation space was expanding at a rate that alarmed Council strategists. But more troubling than the expansion was its character. Traditional conquests involved military defeats and occupation forces. The Confederation grew through voluntary alliance and mutual benefit. Worlds that had been written off as uninhabitable were being transformed into thriving colonies. Species that had been classified as developmentally static were producing innovations that surpassed Council technology. Most dangerous of all, these achievements were happening without Council oversight, guidance, or approval. The tipping point came when the hegemony itself approached the Confederation. The message arrived through the most secure channels available, delivered by a single hegemony ship that appeared at the edge of Confederation space, broadcasting ancient peace protocols. The ship's captain, a pale, austere being named Executor Valchin, requested an audience with the Confederation's leadership. This could be a trap, warned General Morrison, the Confederation's military strategist. The hegemony doesn't do anything without 17 levels of approval and a 1,000-year plan. Admiral Chen studied the tactical reports. Single ship, minimal escort, using diplomatic protocols that predate the current council structure. If it's a trap, it's a very strange one. The meeting took place aboard Freehold Station in the Confederation's main assembly chamber. Executor Valchen stood before representatives from 17 species, his ancient eyes taking in details that would have been invisible to younger races. "I bring greetings from certain elements within the hegemony," he said, his voice carrying harmonics that the translation software marked as formal respect tinged with uncertainty. "We have observed the Confederation's activities with great interest." Admiral Chen stepped forward. "And what conclusions have you reached?" "That the galaxy may be approaching a period of significant change," Valchen replied carefully. "The hegemony has guided galactic civilization for 10 million years through the principles of order, stability, and controlled development. These principles have brought peace and prosperity to countless worlds. But," prompted Takhan, Valchen's expression shifted subtly, "but there are those among us who wonder if our methods have become rigid. The Confederation has achieved in decades what our models suggested would require millennia. You have integrated species we considered incompatible. You have thrived in regions we deemed uninhabitable. You have created stability through diversity rather than through uniformity." The chamber fell silent. This was unprecedented, a hegemony official, even a rogue one, publicly questioning council doctrine. "What are you proposing?" Admiral Chen asked. "Nothing at present," Valchen said. "But there are elements within the hegemony who believe the Confederation represents not a threat to galactic civilization, but an evolution of it. We would like to establish unofficial contact, exchange of ideas, perhaps limited cooperation in areas of mutual interest." Dr. Vasquez leaned forward. "Unofficial contact means you're not speaking for the Council. I am speaking for those who believe the Council's current leadership may be insufficient to the challenges ahead." Admiral Santos felt the weight of the moment. The hegemony wasn't monolithic. It was a civilization millions of years old, containing factions, perspectives, and disagreements that younger races could barely comprehend. If progressive elements within the hegemony were reaching out to the Confederation, it meant humanity's rebellion had achieved something far more significant than anyone had dared: hope. It meant they were winning. The Council's ultimatum, arrived exactly 7 years after humanity's exile, transmitted simultaneously to every Confederation world, ship, and station. High Chancellor Vexhi's image filled screens across 17 star systems, his expression carrying the weight of absolute authority. To the entities calling themselves the Confederation of Free Worlds, he began, the very quotation marks in his voice dripping with disdain. "The Galactic Council has monitored your activities with growing concern. Your unauthorized expansion, your interference with established trade routes, and your recruitment of protected species constitute violations of treaties that have maintained galactic peace for 10 million years." Admiral Chen Wei watched the broadcast from Freehold Station's command center, surrounded by the Confederation's military leadership. Around him, beings from a dozen species listened with expressions ranging from anger to grim satisfaction. "Therefore," the Chancellor continued, "the Council hereby demands the immediate dissolution of all Confederation agreements, the return of all member species to their designated territories or Council oversight, and the surrender of all human leadership for judgment. You have 30 standard days to comply." The transmission ended with the Council's seal, a stylized representation of galactic harmony that now looked more like a cage than a symbol of unity. 30 days, muttered General Morrison. "They're not even pretending this is a negotiation." Admiral Santos pulled up the strategic display. "It's not a negotiation. It's a demonstration. They want to show the galaxy what happens when you challenge the established order." The display showed Council forces massing at strategic points throughout their territory. Battle fleets that hadn't been assembled in centuries were being mobilized. The message was clear: submit or face the full might of galactic civilization. But the Confederation had been preparing for this moment since its founding. The question wasn't whether the Council would eventually move against them, but when and how. "Force assessment?" Admiral Chen asked. General Morrison highlighted the tactical data. Council fleet strength approximately 8,000 capital ships, plus support vessels and system defense forces. Combined Confederation fleet strength, 400 capital ships, but distributed across multiple sectors. So they outnumber us 20 to 1, observed Captain Teketh, the Confederation's Kethavar naval advisor. Those are better odds than my people faced. Admiral Santos smiled grimly. The Council is still thinking in terms of traditional fleet engagements. Massed formations, overwhelming firepower, decisive battles. They're preparing to fight the last war. She was right. The Confederation had learned from the Kethavar's mistake. They wouldn't meet the Council in open battle, where superior numbers and technology could decide the outcome. Instead, they would fight the kind of war that played to their strengths: mobility, adaptability, and the advantage of fighting for something they believed in. Phase 1 begins immediately, Admiral Chen announced. All non-essential personnel are to be evacuated from border systems. Military assets are to implement Scatter Protocol 7. We're not going to give them targets worth the effort of destroying. The next 30 days passed in a flurry of preparation. Confederation worlds emptied as civilians were evacuated to hidden bases in unexplored systems. Military fleets dispersed into the void, following patterns that would have seemed random to Council strategists, but followed a carefully planned network of supply caches and rendezvous points. Most importantly, the Confederation's secret weapons were deployed, not superweapons or revolutionary technology, but something far more dangerous to the Council's stability: information. For 7 years, the Confederation had been building relationships throughout the galaxy, not just with species that had already joined them, but with dissidents, traitors, explorers, and thinkers in Council space who had grown tired of 10 million years of unchanging order. Now those relationships became operational networks. When the Council fleet arrived at New Geneva to accept the Confederation's surrender, they found empty worlds and a single message broadcast on all frequencies. Free beings of the galaxy, witness how the Council maintains peace. The message was accompanied by detailed records of every Council intervention of the past 1,000 years. The forced relocations, the suppressed technologies, the species that had been quietly allowed to die out because they didn't fit Council standards. Most damaging of all, recordings of Council leadership discussing their plans for dealing with problem species that displayed too much independence. Admiral Chen watched the battle from the bridge of the Defiance, humanity's newest and most advanced warship. The Council fleet was magnificent. Thousands of ships in perfect formation, their crystalline hulls reflecting the light of New Geneva's star. They were beautiful, orderly, and utterly predictable. Confederation forces, this is Admiral Chen. Execute Operation Wildcard. What followed wasn't a battle in any traditional sense. It was a demonstration of everything the Confederation had learned about asymmetric warfare. The Council fleet expected resistance from fixed positions, orbital platforms, defensive fleets, the kind of targets that could be systematically destroyed by superior firepower. Instead, they found themselves facing an enemy that refused to stand still. Confederation forces struck from unexpected vectors. Zephyrian bioships emerged from the system's asteroid belt, their living hulls invisible to conventional sensors. Ethereal beings materialized inside Council ships, sabotaging critical systems before vanishing back into energy form. Human vessels equipped with Cortani mining charges turned the system's ice comets into kinetic weapons. Most disorienting of all, the Confederation forces seemed to know exactly where the Council fleet would be at any given moment. Every tactical maneuver was anticipated. Every formation was countered before it could achieve its objective. "How are they doing this?" demanded Council Admiral Zethmar, as his flagship shuddered under another hit from weapons that had appeared from nowhere. "Our tactical computers show no pattern to their movements." His tactical officer, a young hegemony analyst named Sub-Commander Velkan, studied the sensor data with growing amazement. "Sir, I don't think they're using traditional tactics at all. Look at this movement pattern. It's not military, it's biological. Like a living organism responding to threats." Velkan was more right than he knew. The Confederation wasn't fighting like an army. It was fighting like an ecosystem. Each unit operated independently but in harmony with the whole, responding to changes and opportunities faster than any centralized command structure could manage. The Council fleet found itself in the position of a predator, trying to hunt a flock of birds. Every time they focused on one target, 3 others would appear from unexpected directions. Every time they achieved local superiority, their opponents would simply disengage and strike elsewhere. After 6 hours of inconclusive combat, Admiral Zethmar made the decision that would echo through galactic history. He ordered the bombardment of New Geneva's civilian infrastructure. "Sir?" His communications officer protested. "The evacuation broadcasts indicate no military personnel remain on the planet." "The planet itself is a symbol of rebellion," Zethmar replied. "Symbols must be destroyed to maintain order." The first orbital bombardment in 10,000 years began at 1347 hours Galactic Standard Time. Massive energy weapons designed for destroying military targets turned their fury on empty cities, abandoned settlements, and the carefully tended gardens that had made New Geneva humanity's pride. The bombardment was broadcast live across the galaxy by the Confederation's information network. Billions of beings watched the Council's perfect order maintained through the systematic destruction of an empty world. But the bombardment had an unintended consequence. As the Council fleet focused on destroying the planet, they ignored the space around them. Confederation forces moved in, all units. "This is Admiral Chen. Execute final protocol." The final protocol was the Confederation's ultimate contingency, a coordinated strike not against the Council fleet, but against their ability to leave the system. Working in perfect coordination, Confederation forces disabled the Council fleet's hyperspace generators, trapped them in normal space, and surrounded them with a web of firepower that made escape impossible. For the first time in galactic history, a Council fleet found itself at the mercy of the forces it had come to destroy. "Council fleet," Admiral Chen broadcast on all frequencies, "you are now prisoners of war. Your ships will be impounded, your crews will be detained, and your commanders will stand trial for war crimes against civilian populations." The silence that followed lasted exactly 37 seconds before Admiral Zethmar responded. "This is unprecedented. The Council does not negotiate with criminals." "You're not negotiating with criminals," Admiral Chen replied. "You're surrendering to the legitimate military forces of a sovereign confederation. The era of Council dominance is over." The trial of Admiral Zethmar and the Council fleet's senior officers took place on Freehold Station, broadcast live to every world in the galaxy. For the first time in recorded history, Council leadership found themselves answering to a higher authority, the judgment of the free peoples they had claimed to protect. The evidence was overwhelming. Not just the bombardment of New Geneva, but millennia of suppressed records detailing the Council's methods of maintaining order, species driven to extinction for being incompatible with galactic harmony, worlds stripped of resources, under the guise of development assistance, technologies suppressed because they might threaten established power structures. But the real shock came when Executor Valchen of the hegemony took the witness stand not as a defendant, but as a prosecutor. For 10 million years, he testified, the hegemony has believed that order was more important than justice, that stability was more valuable than growth, that control was preferable to freedom. We were wrong. His testimony revealed the extent of progressive sentiment within the hegemony itself. Nearly 40% of hegemony leadership had grown disillusioned with the Council's methods. The Confederation's success hadn't just challenged the Council's power, it had shown their own people that there were alternatives to 10 million years of stagnation. The verdicts were unanimous. Admiral Zethmar and his senior staff were found guilty of war crimes and crimes against sentient beings. But more importantly, the tribunal ruled that the Galactic Council itself had lost its legitimacy through systematic abuse of power. President Martinez, now serving her third term as the Confederation's elected leader, stood before the Assembly to announce the tribunal's final judgment. The Galactic Council, as currently constituted, is hereby dissolved. Its authority is revoked, its treaties are nullified, and its member species are free to choose their own paths forward. The galaxy held its breath. In the space of months, a political structure that had endured for 10 million years had been swept away by a species that had barely achieved interstellar travel a decade earlier. But humanity had learned the lessons of their own history. They didn't seek to replace the Council with another hierarchy. They offered something entirely different. The Confederation of Free Worlds extends an invitation to all species, including former council members, to join us in building a new kind of galactic civilization. One based not on dominance and control, but on cooperation and mutual respect. One that celebrates diversity rather than demanding conformity. One that chooses growth over stability, justice over order, and freedom over security. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Within days, dozens of former council species had applied for Confederation membership. The Zarathi, whose crystalline forms had once voted for humanity's exile, now sought alliance with the species they had underestimated. The aquatic depths, masters of biotechnology, offered their expertise to Confederation medical programs. Even factions within the Eternal Minds began broadcasting messages of support for the new order. But the transformation went deeper than political realignments. The Confederation's success had sparked something unprecedented in galactic history. A renaissance of innovation and exploration that swept across civilized space. Species that had been stagnant for millennia suddenly began developing new technologies, exploring new worlds, attempting projects that would have been forbidden under council oversight. The galaxy, which had been static for 10 million years, exploded into activity. Dr. Elena Vasquez, now serving as the Confederation's first Galactic Cultural Exchange Director, stood in her office aboard Freehold Station, watching reports stream in from across the galaxy. Each report described new discoveries, new alliances, new possibilities that would have been impossible under the old order. The Zentani have rediscovered their ancestral passion for stellar engineering, she read from one report. They're beginning construction of the galaxy's first artificial binary star system. The Morphic Collective has established the first truly voluntary hive mind network, said another. Individual consciousness preserved within collective intelligence, something Council xenopsychologists declared impossible. 3 species in the Outer Rim have formed a joint expedition to explore the galactic core. They're using Zephyrian bioships enhanced with Cortani mining equipment and guided by ethereal energy manipulation techniques. Admiral Chen Wei entered her office, looking both exhausted and exhilarated. The integration reports from the former council worlds are coming in. 47 species have formally applied for Confederation membership. Another 112 have established trade relationships or cultural exchange programs. Any problems? Vasquez asked. The usual growing pains. Some species are having trouble adjusting to the idea that they don't need permission to pursue their own interests. Others are overwhelmed by the sudden freedom to interact with cultures they've been isolated from for millennia. But overall, Chen smiled. We're succeeding beyond our wildest projections. Vasquez pulled up a holographic map of the galaxy. A year ago, it had been dominated by red zones marking council space. Now those zones were rapidly turning blue as species after species chose to join the Confederation or establish independent alliances. But the most significant change wasn't visible on any map. For the first time in galactic history, civilization was expanding outward rather than inward. Instead of consolidating control over known space, the galaxy's peoples were pushing into unexplored regions, seeking new worlds, new resources, new possibilities. We've started something we can't control, Vasquez observed. And that might be the most human thing we've ever done. Chen nodded. The Council's mistake was thinking that order had to be imposed from above. They never understood that the best kind of order emerges from freedom. Chaotic, unpredictable, but ultimately more stable than anything you can build through force. A soft chime indicated an incoming priority message. Vasquez accepted the transmission, and Ambassador Sarah Chen's face appeared. The same woman who had stood before the Council 7 years earlier to defend humanity's actions in the Kythera system. Director Vasquez, Admiral Chen, she said, I'm transmitting from the edge of Council space, former Council space, I should say. We've just made contact with a species the Council classified as extinct, the Veltar. Vasquez felt her breath catch. The Veltar. The species humanity had saved from solar flares, the action that had led to their exile from the Council. They survived. Not just survived, thrived. The 12 million we evacuated have grown to nearly 1 billion across 17 worlds. They've developed their own interstellar civilization, and they want to formally thank humanity for giving them the chance to exist. Chen smiled. And there's more. They've been in contact with other species humanity helped during our time in Council space. The Kepler refugees, the asteroid miners we relocated, the colony ships we protected from pirates. Word is spreading that humanity is building something new, and they all want to be part of it. The transmission continued with details of new alliances, technological exchanges, and cooperative ventures that would have been impossible under the Council's rigid oversight. But Vasquez found herself thinking about something larger. 7 years ago, humanity had been a young species, barely capable of interstellar travel, dependent on Council technology and guidance. The Council had seen them as children who needed supervision, primitives who required civilization. Now, those same primitives had dismantled a 10-million-year-old empire and replaced it with something unprecedented, a truly free galactic civilization. "Admiral," she said to Chen, "do you ever wonder what we would have become if the Council had accepted our actions in the Kythera system? If they had embraced our methods instead of exiling us?" Chen considered the question. "I think we would have become just another Council species. Advanced, comfortable, and completely stagnant. They would have taught us their version of wisdom, and we would have spent the next 1,000,000 years maintaining their version of order. Instead they gave us the greatest gift possible. They forced us to become ourselves. Not a pale imitation of galactic civilization, but something entirely new." Captain James Santos Kim stood on the observation deck of the GSV New Horizons, watching the double sunrise over Kepler 442c. The planet had been discovered only 5 years earlier by a joint human-Veltar exploration mission, and it was already home to nearly 10 million beings from 40 different species. Unlike the carefully planned colonies of the old Council era, Kepler 442c had grown organically. Zephyrian biogardens spiraled up the sides of Cortani mining complexes. Ethereal energy sculptures danced between human architectural frameworks. Kethvar defensive installations protected research stations where former enemies now worked side by side to push the boundaries of known science. It was chaotic, inefficient, and absolutely beautiful. "Captain," came a voice behind him. He turned to see Lieutenant Commander Zara Okafor, his chief science officer, approaching with a data pad. "The long-range sensors have picked up something interesting at the galactic edge." Santos Kim took the pad and studied the readings. Energy signatures unlike anything in the Confederation's databases, moving in patterns that suggested intelligence, but following no recognizable technology. "First contact protocols?" he asked. "Already implemented. But Captain, these readings suggest a civilization that makes the old Council look primitive. We're talking about beings who manipulate space-time itself, who exist partially outside normal dimensions." Santos Kim felt the familiar thrill of discovery, the same emotion that had driven his grandmother Rosa to explore the Perseus Arm decades earlier. "Recommendations?" The safe choice would be to observe from a distance, compile data, maybe send an unmanned probe. "Standard first contact procedures, and the unsafe choice?" Lieutenant Commander Okafor smiled, an expression that would have been impossible during the Council era, when junior officers never questioned established protocols. "We go meet them, all of us. Every species in the Confederation. Show them what we've built, what we've become." It was a thoroughly human suggestion, reckless, optimistic, and completely contrary to every rule of interstellar diplomacy. It was also exactly what Santos Kim wanted to hear. Signal the Confederation Council. Prepare a message for transmission to all member worlds and allied species. He paused, thinking of his ancestors who had made similar decisions in the face of the unknown. "We're about to find out if the galaxy is ready for whatever comes next." The message went out across Confederation space that same day, carried by quantum entanglement networks that spanned half the galaxy. It was simple, direct, and quintessentially human. "To all free beings of the galaxy, we have discovered evidence of an advanced civilization beyond our current borders. Rather than approach them as separate species, we propose to meet them as what we have become, a confederation of different peoples united by the simple belief that diversity makes us stronger, that cooperation achieves more than competition, and that the unknown is an opportunity, not a threat." 20 years ago, humanity was exiled from the Galactic Council for refusing to stand by while innocents died. Today, we stand ready to meet whatever lies beyond the edge of known space, not as conquerors or suppliants, but as representatives of a new kind of civilization. We are the Confederation of Free Worlds. We are explorers, builders, protectors, and dreamers. We are the children of 1,000 different evolutionary paths, and we are stronger for our differences, and we are ready for whatever the universe has to show us next. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Every member species of the Confederation volunteered ships, personnel, and resources for the expedition. Former Council species, now free to pursue their own interests, contributed technologies that had been suppressed for millennia. Independent worlds that had never been part of any galactic organization offered their support. Within 6 months, the largest fleet in galactic history had assembled at the edge of Confederation space. Not a military armada, but an exploration fleet representing every form of intelligence the galaxy had produced. Admiral Chen Wei, now in his 70s but still sharp as plasma steel, stood on the bridge of the Confederation flagship Unity and Diversity. Around him, beings from hundreds of worlds prepared for humanity's greatest adventure yet. "All ships report ready for hyperspace transition," announced his tactical officer, a Zarathi whose crystalline form pulsed with excitement. "Sensors show clear space ahead," reported his science officer, an ethereal whose energy patterns indicated curiosity mixed with anticipation. "Communications networks are active across the fleet," confirmed his communications officer, a Veltar whose 4 arms worked multiple control surfaces simultaneously. Chen looked around his bridge, marveling at how natural this diversity had become. 20 years ago, these species had been strangers, enemies, or subjects of Council oversight. Now they worked together so seamlessly that it was hard to imagine they had ever been apart. "Signal the fleet," he ordered. "All ships prepare for hyperspace jump. Course, galactic edge, coordinates unknown. Destination, the future." The fleet jumped as one, thousands of ships carrying millions of beings toward an encounter that would define the next phase of galactic history. They didn't know what they would find beyond the edge of mapped space. They didn't know if the advanced civilization would be friendly, hostile, or simply indifferent. But they knew one thing with absolute certainty. Whatever they found, they would face it together. Behind them, the galaxy continued its transformation. Former Council worlds explored new possibilities. Independent species formed new alliances. The rigid order that had ruled for 10 million years continued to give way to something chaotic, unpredictable and vital. And in the Sol system, on a small blue world where it had all begun, monuments commemorated the moment when a young species had chosen to do what was right rather than what was safe, and in doing so had changed the course of galactic history. The inscription on Earth's monument to the Exiled was simple, written in every language spoken by the Confederation's member species. They told us we were too young to understand the complexity of galactic civilization. They told us we were too primitive to govern ourselves. They told us we were too emotional to make rational decisions. They were wrong. We were exactly what the galaxy needed. 50 years after humanity's exile from the Galactic Council, the galaxy bore no resemblance to the ordered, static civilization that had once ruled from the pristine halls of the Council Station. The Confederation of Free Worlds now encompassed over 3,000 species across half the galaxy. But unlike the old Council, it ruled nothing and controlled no one. It simply provided a framework for cooperation, a forum for dispute resolution, and a launching point for adventures that carried civilization ever outward into the unknown. The encounter with the beings beyond the galactic edge had led to the most profound expansion of knowledge in recorded history. The transcendents, as they came to be known, existed across multiple dimensions simultaneously, experiencing time as a navigable medium rather than a linear progression. They had watched the galaxy's civilizations rise and fall for billions of years, waiting for one that would be ready to join them in exploring realities beyond physical space. That civilization, they declared, was not the ancient and wise Council, but the chaotic, diverse, impossibly optimistic confederation that had grown from humanity's stubborn refusal to accept that watching innocents die was the mark of an advanced species. The old Council station still existed, maintained now as a museum and reminder of what happens when order becomes more important than justice. Tourists from across the galaxy came to see the chamber where humanity had been judged and found wanting, where the decision had been made that would ultimately transform galactic civilization. On Earth, in the city once known as Geneva, an elderly woman named Sarah Chen walked through gardens that had been tended by beings from 100 different worlds. As humanity's first ambassador to the galaxy, she had lived to see her species grow from exiled outcasts to the catalyst for the greatest expansion of consciousness in galactic history. A young reporter, a member of a species that had achieved spaceflight only 5 years earlier, approached her with the eager curiosity that marked all the galaxy's newcomers. "Ambassador Chen," the reporter asked, "when you stood before the Council 50 years ago, did you know what would happen? Did you know that humanity's exile would lead to all of this?" Sarah smiled, looking up at skies where ships from 1,000 worlds traced paths between the stars. "I knew that doing the right thing was more important than doing the safe thing. I knew that standing up for innocence was worth any price they could make us pay. And the rest?" "The rest," Sarah said, "was just humanity being human. We don't accept limits. We don't recognize impossible. And we never, ever stop believing that tomorrow can be better than today." The reporter looked around at the bustling, chaotic, magnificent civilization that humanity had helped create. Ships were departing for the Andromeda galaxy, where new species waited to be discovered. Research stations in parallel dimensions were unlocking the secrets of existence itself. Beings who had never dreamed of leaving their home systems were joining exploration fleets bound for realms of reality that had no names. "What comes next?" the reporter asked. Sarah Chen looked up at the stars, not the carefully catalogued, regulated stars of the old council, but the infinite, uncharted wilderness that called to every species with the courage to answer. "Everything," she said simply. "Everything comes next. This script represents the complete exiled from the council. Earth builds an empire story, chronicling humanity's journey from galactic outcasts to the founders of a new kind of civilization. It's structured for dramatic reading or adaptation, with clear part divisions and character arcs that showcase humanity's resilience, ingenuity, and unwavering commitment to doing what's right. The core themes of the HFY Humanity Phi, genre.